So as you know, the forum's being conducted in English. However, if you require simultaneous translation, we do have simultaneous translation devices available in the back, and it's being simultaneously translated into Cantonese on channel 2 and Mandarin on channel 3. Okay, those of you who are still hovering over the coffee bar, come on back, we're going to start. So my name again is Hal Josephson, and I know many of you, if not most of you, identify my accent as American, and it is. I was born and raised in the United States, spent 25 years in San Francisco, and the last decade actually in New Zealand, hence my change to a black shirt to sort of honor the Rugby World Cup champions, the All Blacks in 2011. And also because our next speaker is from New Zealand, from Wellington, New Zealand. So it's our honor actually to have Dave Gibson, the founder and chairman of the Gibson Group, as our after-lunch keynote speaker. Dave is one of the leading producers in New Zealand of film and television. He has produced feature films and television programs that have aired in over 80 countries worldwide. He has co-produced major television dramas, feature films with partners in Canada, Britain, Australia, Germany, and Sweden, and there's more to come. In recent years, the Gibson Group has broadened its scope to include the fast-growing areas of new media and branded entertainment. It's my pleasure to invite Dave Gibson. Where is he? There he is, to share his thoughts on digital technology by design, global applications for digital entertainment.
Thanks,
Dave.
Thank you. Oh, no, we can shake hands. We'll just. A few weeks ago, when I started to make a few notes for today's talk, it was entitled 21st Century Digital Content Creation, and then I noticed recently it had changed to Technology by Design, and I think that Andrew Orgel got given my old topic for later this afternoon, which is okay because I want to briefly talk about both those areas and give them a particular point of view. And the point of view that I want to take is a combination of our background and beliefs and how our company approaches design and content, in particular on visitor attraction and museum jobs. So who are we? As Hal said, we were originally primarily a film and television company, but recently we've really broadened out and we have a very big growing industry and business in museum installations and exhibition design. And we've made or involved in creating at the moment, right now, installations in around 10 different countries. So how's that relevant to digital design? And I thought I'd put up a paragraph from a website of an educational institution in New Zealand that promotes its degree in digital design. And you'll see that there's a lot of references now about things like the medical industry, health, recreation, architecture, gallery facilities, and education. So design of the moving image is really at the heart of digital design. And it's a real growth area. And while it's prevalent throughout our company and our business, the area I want to talk about today is really about exhibition design. And in particular, the balance between design, technology, and content. And how does the design or the look and feel of a show actually reflect the content, and how does technology fit into that? Perhaps unsurprisingly in our business, we still tend to ask ourselves all the questions that we used to ask in the old days. What's it about? Who's the audience? What do we want them to experience, to feel, or to learn? And because we began as a film and television company, that has an effect on it. And when we started in the old days, we used to say we were in the storytelling business. But we began to do more and more digital installations and create experiences that didn't have stories in the way that we understood them. And that involved environments or installations where people create their own experiences and stories from the tools that we gave them. And while it could be rather odd so early in my speech to quote another company that works in the same space as us, there is a quote from an American company that I particularly like who talk about how storytelling has evolved in the digital age, and it puts it really well. The evolution of media means that the story no longer flows in one direction from the one to the many. Through a framework of possibility that visitors use to weave their own story, the narrative is only visible in hindsight when their path is revealed. And I'd like you to keep that in mind as we talk through what I'm going to talk about. Bear that difference, storytelling has changed considerably, and that's a very key thing. A couple of disclaimers. I'm the chairman of a company, so I'm not a technical whiz kid, so I don't want too many really, really complicated technical questions at the end. And secondly, Hal has encouraged me to be predictive about the future and talk about technology, which is kind of a big ask because I don't really have a lot of confidence in exactly what's going to happen. When I started in the film and TV business, the capture paths and the post paths for what we did were exactly the same. We'd shoot on film, we'd finish on film. Then we moved to video, we shoot on video, we finish on video. Now that we're in the digital world, literally every single production that we do has a completely different capture and post path combination. We never do the same thing twice. So it makes it really difficult to be predictive about the exact nature of what's going to happen. Having said that, I do plan to do that and to talk about this relationship between content and design by showing and talking about some examples, because I think examples are probably the best way for us to get to understand this. The key point that I want to make, that I think hopefully will come through, is that content and audience lead design and technology. I thought we might start, because it's after lunch, with a quick little piece of video. This is a little bit out of one of our reels. It doesn't show some of our newer work, particularly the Vegan Wall in Denmark, which I want to talk about specifically. But we'll run this up now, just to give you a little bit of a wake-up after lunch. So there's a couple of aspects in that clip that I'd like to draw your attention to about the museum and the exhibition world. And the first is that it's a real social environment. People are all around you. It's not generally a solitary experience, which is different to a lot of things that will be talked about today. Secondly, exhibits and museums have something that the virtual world doesn't have, which is real objects, and of course the physical environment that they're housed in. And we can't underestimate the importance of real objects and the physical environment. They have a real emotional impact. And we all know this and have got direct experience of it. You wouldn't want to go to a Monet exhibition and look at a whole lot of facsimiles or look at a Monet picture on a television screen. If you've been to see the Mona Lisa in Paris, apart from being surprised at how small it was, you'd probably still feel some emotional impact from standing there and looking at one of the world's most famous paintings. Having said that, in today's world, do museums need to change? And our theory in our company is that museums must give people much more and deeper access to their collections at any one time. And most museums in the world will display only maybe 3 to 5% of what they actually have to the public at any one time. And we also think that they need to get a lot more sort of up with the whole prevalent communication technologies of the day and become at least as connected as any visitor that walks in the door. And I'll illustrate those couple of points now. A few years ago, we won a tender from the Museum of Copenhagen. And they were a very, very small, quite traditional museum. They just had a couple of hundred visitors a day. But what was happening in Copenhagen at the time was that they were going to build a new underground circle railway in the city. And so for about 5 years, they were going to be digging up the city. There's going to be a lot of confusion, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people because there were dig sites all over the city, and also it was going to be an archaeological dig. And so they wanted to somehow or other to make people feel happy about what was happening, but to also make them understand it and to make them get a better sense of their city. And their city had a lot of interesting areas. It had areas that were known for the lovers or the poets or the lawyers and things like this. And they wanted to kind of get this feeling out and to do something a little bit different. So we came up with the idea of a movable interactive display where people could add or create content. And I'd just like to show you that clip of what we did in Copenhagen before I talk a little bit about the technologies of it.
The Museum of Copenhagen has taken to the streets. A 12-metre mobile interactive video wall attracts up to 4,000 visitors a day to explore the cultural geography and history of Copenhagen. The heart of the wall is a 3D digital model of the city, composed of images from the museum's collection, crafted into a cultural landscape. The skin of the wall is 4 giant high-definition plasma touchscreens where you can explore the digital cityscape in all directions. The digital model of the city is also composed historically, so by adjusting a timeline toolbar you can explore the city in different historical periods. User-generated content is one of the most popular aspects of the wall, and one of the most popular forms is to create a postcard. That can be sent by email to multiple email addresses. There are sometimes as many as 500 postcards sent from the wall in a single day. The wall operates 365 days a year. It has been purpose-designed and constructed for robustness. The software applications were also custom designed and built for the project, including a cityscape creation engine which allows the digital city to be composed and updated in 3D. The wall is the first time sophisticated multi-touch technology has been used on such a large scale. All operations and systems are monitored remotely and continuously, alerting technicians and security personnel of any potential problems.
When we started out, I had no idea what the technology could do. It was really important that it was visual. I wanted it to be quite intuitive and therefore open. And I think we've got all this and more in the way the wall turned out to be.
Now, the relevant aspect of that clip for today's talk is how the digital design of that wall has come from a need and how it reflects the content, i.e. the story of Copenhagen. Or to put it another way, up to 4,000 different stories each day, because each story is different for each user. And also I want you to remember those 2 earlier points. Notice how social the wall is, how often you saw people as couples or in groups interacting with the wall. And one of the major trends in exhibition experience to me is as a social activity. And the vast majority of extended interactions with the wall take place with company, with partners and friends and families rather than a solo person walking around the city. We think that trend, together with social media, will become a really determining effect on exhibition design in the next few years. We monitor that wall from our office in New Zealand. It is actually possible that that wall, apart from the fact that we have to have a security guard put the door down at midnight in case someone's caught between the door and the wall, we can actually run the whole thing from the other side of the world. Nobody actually needs to be there at any time of the day. And there was a really nice story. When the wall first came up, our director of projects, a guy called Alan Smith, was monitoring just not so much the technical metadata and all the stuff that we can actually tell you about, but actually just watching people working on the wall. And he saw a very old couple spend 4 hours standing in front of the wall exploring a small part of Copenhagen and touching a variety of buildings and opening up files and looking at it. And although he couldn't hear what they said because we don't have sound feed, what he could tell was that they were talking about their life and their relationship with the city, probably where they'd met, where they'd courted, where their children had gone, and a whole lot of things. And they spent 4 or 5 hours just interacting with that wall at the age of about 80 to 90 years old, which is very relevant to the conversation this morning about the age of people. You also see quite odd sort of social conventions. I've got a few stills that we should be running at the same time, that's good. And one that we don't quite know what to make of is quite a curious gender divide. So time and again what we see, if there's a couple, we see the guy doing all the initial things. So he'll do these sort of things, he'll play with a wall. The female is more likely to observe or to make suggestions, but the moment they have to do anything like send a postcard or send an email, it immediately changes, and that without anybody saying anything, the woman steps up and the woman becomes involved in doing it. Well, we don't know whether that's a worldwide trend, but it certainly seems to be something interesting in Copenhagen. And of course, the other trend that you can see in the wall is the big public contribution that people make to the exhibition. And the wall is open to user uploads, and these are dramatically changing the nature of the museum's collection. And I want to show you a little still of, you can't see very easily on the still, but this little child is actually tied by rope to the post. And this photo was uploaded to the wall by an older guy, and it's him when he was a 5-year-old, tied to a lamppost in one of the central squares in Copenhagen. And almost immediately people saw this. There was this huge outpouring, both in social media and the web, and also directly onto the wall, about people expressing their outrage that you could take a child and tie him to a lamppost in the middle of Copenhagen. And he himself personally and very patiently replied to all of these posts, explaining that what happened was he came from the country, he came from a small farm, and he hated being inside. So every time he went to Copenhagen with his parents, he was really happy. He didn't want to go into the shops, he didn't want to go anywhere. He liked the idea of being tied to the lamppost, and he was perfectly happy with us. And this digital debate went on for some time, until eventually the museum people came into the middle of it and actually asked him for the actual physical photo to make part of their main collection at the museum as part of social history. And I really like that story because it's an example of how the design and the creation of the wall actually enabled that particular story to shine up and to appear. It would never have appeared in the old days under a traditional museum curating situation. And that's why we're very lucky with the Museum of Copenhagen. We have a client who really understands the need for design to follow content and has a really good understanding of public participation and collaboration in the way that that content's shaped. And I should add that with the wall, there's quite a few groundbreaking technical things for technical people. The large plasma screens that you saw are not actually touch screens, because there are no, at the time we built the wall, and I think even now, there are no touch screens of that size. So basically what we did was we created a laser system that ran across the front of it. The screens are multi-user, multi-touch, so you can be standing alongside someone on the same screen. You can both be doing different things in different parts of the screen. It works, as you can imagine, very well outside, because what we've done is we've got a German glass manufacturer who does the glass for Mercedes-Benz dashboards and things like that, has created the special anti-reflective, anti-glare glass, which is, and you're actually touching the glass, you're not touching the screen, and the laser's running down in front of the glass. And also the other technical thing is that this is outside, so it has to cope with a very wide variation in temperature that you get in Copenhagen. Inside the system that runs it, there's a full HD graphical interface that's powered by a 3D render engine that we developed that pulls the images and the metadata in real time from a database. And that database is constantly being upgraded. People are sending things in from the web, they're putting things in from mobile phones. There's a stick system, you can put a stick in while you're standing there, and it's really a key part of what we're trying to do with a lot of our things, is to really get public participation into the heart of technology. And I want to talk a little bit about another one that we've got, where we've moved not just into the digital area, but we've got, as I talked about earlier, physical objects. So in the wall we had just digital contributions. Now on this new project which we're doing in Copenhagen, we have physical and digital. And it's the 200th anniversary of a Danish philosopher called Søren Kierkegaard. I never quite know how to pronounce that name. And we've designed an exhibition which features 9 famous objects from his life, each representing a philosophical theme from his writings about love. such as the engagement ring that he brought his beloved, to whom he devoted many a page of things. Now, we've got a little caricature of him. He probably wasn't a great catch, I don't think. Not a particularly attractive fellow. So it was no surprise that 13 months after he became engaged, he opted to continue his celibate lifestyle, and he took the ring back from his girlfriend and made it into a necklace. So we've got these little objects that are associated with his life, and we've put them on object cases on the inner side of the circle. And then on the outer side of the circle, there'll be objects that are contributed by people who visit the museum, so they can bring physical objects into the museum that they consider relate to the themes. Now, the exhibition is about to open in a week, so I don't have any photos of actually what it looks like yet, but we're pretty optimistic that it will work well. Obviously, there's a great deal of software that's behind the scenes, and there's user videos, but the trend we're talking about is embodied a little bit in that design of that thing, in the circular design, because what we're thinking about is the museums traditionally have been a lot inward looking, and we're trying to really help them to open it out and look a little more outward, and to involve the public in the way that it changes the nature of the content. Okay, so now I want to, in a way, having talked about objects, I want to break the mold a bit and talk about something that we built from the ground up. We've got another slide here. I'll show you some slides from a museum we built in France and did the whole design and the content and everything. So this is a museum called Palais. It's in Saint-Césaire in France, and the background to this is that this is the site that they found the last Neanderthal skeleton in France. And I'm sure there's probably some sort of Neanderthal joke that I've been trying to work out for the last couple of days about Neanderthals going into bars, but I haven't kind of worked out exactly what it is. The interesting thing about this museum is all they had was the skeleton of a Neanderthal. They had a few collections of bones. They wanted to build a visitor centre. They wanted to get people to come to it. They wanted people to recognise how important the site was. But all they had was layers of samples of dirt and dust and things like that. So what we did was, the idea that we came up with, again, the idea of a story and try to create paths, is we created the idea of an archaeological detective story, so that people who came there would try to work out what had happened from the clues. So we've created little object theatres. We have robots opening specimen drawers. We send videos of these objects to screens of commentary, and later on visitors themselves can go through things, touch screens, and work out what's going on and how to do it. Also, we've got one of my favourite rooms in Palais is where kids can do simple things like see what they would look like as a Neanderthal. So they just go up and they have a morphing screen, and their face turns into a Neanderthal. They can get a print out of that, they can take it home, they can understand that sort of thing. They can also arm wrestle a Neanderthal, because Neanderthals had very, very strong right arms. Interestingly enough, we're all right-handed because of spear throwing and a variety of things. And so we've got some photos, I think, coming up next of people doing that. And in this room where we've got a lot of these sort of, what most people would think of as probably gimmicks and things, but all of which have a story behind them, this room has a variety of things where people can come into it, and it's got multiple pathways. So an older person might go through certain exhibitions, kids will go through a number of other things, and pretty much without fail, 30 minutes later, they'll all come out the other end at the same time. We've got things like people learning about the differences between modern man skeleton and a Neanderthal skeleton, or learning about a certain bone in the back of the throat indicating they had the ability to articulate language, which some people got really engrossed in, which is a little guy there who was quite intrigued by this. So it's interesting within this one because people will go through a variety of pathways, and to some extent they'll be the same. But what we know, for example, with the vegan wall, is that no one, because of the large amount of material, will ever follow the same pathway or have the same story. I also wanted just to touch on something here we did in New Zealand, which is at the Museum of New Zealand, and the theme of this particular exhibition was New Zealand identity. And we just created this massive map, which is about 20 metres long, of New Zealand. When you step on a particular point, light runs out up to what looks like a mirrored wall, and a whole lot of images come up of that particular place. So if you come from a town and you go and stand on that town, then a whole lot of material about that town will come up. If you're not happy with that material, you can contribute the material about your town that you want to and do that. And what we found again is that we get people who will just literally sit on this map for 20 or 30 minutes and discuss the place they came from, and things like that. And there's now something like 15,000 pieces of metadata that people have contributed about the small towns and the villages and things that they come from. After that, they can take that metadata into another wall, they can take it across, and they can do, particularly for younger people, they can do a whole sort of mashup of material on that, and using laser controls that we've developed ourselves, which are kind of like a very sophisticated form of Wii technology. And then just because I've given you examples of sort of rather complicated technology, or technology that's quite sophisticated, I wanted to talk to you very briefly about the fact that sometimes what we do is so simple in terms of technology because that's all we need to do. And during the Rugby World Cup in 2011, we did an exhibition for Te Papa again, which was how to learn the Māori war dance, the haka, which is a simple little dance that most people see the All Blacks do but don't know how to do themselves. And so what we did was, I've got a little video that I'll play, and I'll just talk over that as we go. And initially from the outside, this looks like quite a traditional exhibition. It's got the story of the haka, it's got sort of photos, it's got the things that you would expect in a traditional museum environment. You learn about the backstory and things like that, the types of things, a couple of little pieces of video. But then inside is where it gets interesting, because you go in groups of 8, and the haka is broken down into a variety in slow motion. First of all, you learn how to do the particular moves, and then we build it up a little bit into the next stage, and you're practicing particular parts of it. It also knows whether you're a male or a female, because there's slightly different dances for each thing. And then at the end, the lights go down, the people on the screen become full costume, and you do the full dance. It's shot with 2 cameras, it's stitched together, and then outside afterwards you can go out, and the group that you're in, the 8 people, you can go out, you can look at it, you can laugh about it, and you can take a USB stick home with you doing your version of the haka. And the weird thing about this is that the hardest part was actually just breaking down the dance or working out how to teach the dance. Technology was just basically an Xbox Dance Central type game, using Kinect. So the technology was like a very, very simple part that just followed one good idea. And the idea of this is you don't have to score a large number of points or anything, you just have to create some sort of harmonious social environment. And this was a huge success. This is one of these gigs that had like a 90% occupancy rate and was very, very simple to do. So by showing you these examples, what I'm hoping is coming through is that our digital and exhibition design comes out of the audience and the content. And as I said before, there's not so much standard storytelling, there's also content and tools that enable people to create their own experiences and stories and add their own content. So what we're creating is individual, bespoke experiences, each one designed and each with its own technology. We're not an equipment supplier trying to sell you a piece of gear that we've made and we're trying to sell the 45th version of it. So we're always trying to design an experience using technology. And I thought that, having said that, what I'd talk about just to close was what we do think is going to happen maybe in the technology area of museums. And I think one of the big topics that we talk about a lot is the idea of, when you go to a museum, can it become a sort of an integrated whole that's supported in some way by digital design? And associated with that is the question about visitor tracking. If you can track visitors individually through an exhibition over an hour or 2 or 3 hours, then that would be very interesting. Because you'd be guided through the museum, you'd be tracked through the museum, you'd be presented with exhibition material that was peculiar to you and appropriate to your age, your language, your interests, and you could respond by leaving material that you wanted to leave there. You could leave your own commentary, you could leave with a record of what you've done, you could access the museum afterwards, you can update things, you could contribute, following that, and also the museum would know an awful lot about you and about what the visitors were doing, and that would inform its strategies for its exhibitions. And there's a couple of things about this, because it slightly contradicts what I've said before about how we create things, because the potential problem is, as exhibit designers, we might find ourselves restricted by the technology of the museum, because they might have to have a museum-wide technology that won't fit our design ambitions for that particular thing. And secondly, it's a really hard nut to crack because everything in the museum has to fit into some sort of technical design. And that would mean for all the previous exhibits and all the future exhibits. And it would make it really, and that would have to work with people, every person who designed things for them. And it would only work really if the museum got into it and did that. So there's kind of some benefits, but there's also some problems. What would it take to happen? And I think that the technology for an integrated visit to a museum is probably floating around. It's never really been put together in one sort of thing and widely adopted by museums. But I think what we're waiting to see happen, and what will really make it hum, is the unique tracking of individuals. And I think this is the technology that's really only just starting to mature. And again, if we could track every single person through a museum, then we could target content that would be completely appropriate to them. And we wouldn't have to clutter anything with details that weren't relevant to you or your age. We could give a 10-year-old a very simple thing. We could give their grandfather a more complicated thing in written form that would match whatever neuro-linguistic programming approach that they had. And we'd know really fast if something wasn't working. And we could tie the whole visitor tracking into sort of wayfinding so that you moved around the museum in the right way and give you a whole new response. The thing that's interesting about it, of course, is ethical. So if we did this, we've then got a situation where we've got to think through the whole sort of ethics of it. What data do we keep? What control do you have over the data that the museum has? And what privacy? So minimum requirement would be that you'd have to be able to opt in or opt out. And I guess that would probably take out things like sort of face recognition software where you weren't necessarily aware of what was going on, apart from the fact that probably face recognition software is not good enough anyway. And one of the things that obviously is the answer is probably some sort of very simple digital ID that you carry. And I think there's a few technologies that would work, but the one that we think would be interesting would be radio frequency tags. And if we could get them to have a unique code and just send out that signal, and I'm imagining that these sort of things exist in Hong Kong. We've got situations in Wellington where people can get on a bus with a snapper card, but the problem is they have to hold the card quite close to the reader, and so what we're going to need eventually is something that operates at a better distance of several meters away, so that as we move towards the exhibit that it knows that we're there. We're also going to need something that doesn't have a battery, and we're also going to need something that's really, really cheap, because the thing about museums is they have a lot of visitors. So anything that's expensive is not going to work particularly well. And I think there is a version of that starting to happen that will come about. And of course, it's the same sort of technology that manufacturers are trying to put into products. And once that becomes ubiquitous and quite wide-ranging, and we get this thing called the Internet of Things, where every single object that we have has some sort of very simple tracking device in it, then we're going to be in good shape, and that's what's going to happen. And I think that that's when we'll start to see a really interesting thing in the museum of the future. So just to summarize, what I hope I've done is given you a pretty good overview of the fact that while we're a company that uses technology, that's quite au fait with technology, that has a lot of software developers and people looking for things to solve things, we don't go into something like that. We tend to start with the audience, the story, the emotions, what we want people to take from it, and from that we work out what to do. But having said that, we're also constantly tracking what the technologies are and things like RFID, so that we know that when that cusp hits, that we can take advantage of it and move forward. So I hope that's just given you a little bit of an idea of design and technology and some of the connections between that. Thank you very much.